Jacob Burton here, and if you have attended one of my culinary boot camps, or you've gone through the online culinary boot camp course with the F-STEP curriculum, you've no doubt seen reference to the F-STEP worksheet. One of the most common questions I get is, hey chef, how do we actually fill out the F-STEP worksheet and make it work for us? And the F-STEP worksheet was originally developed for in-person culinary training to help guide people through the dish creation process, so they could either use the F-STEP worksheet to understand at a fundamental level a pre-existing dish that they wanted to learn better, or to possibly riff on, or to recreate, or how to from scratch create their own dish. So every dish, everything that you cook, everything you create in the kitchen will start with one primary flavor. And your primary flavor is the flavor of, it's the star of your dish, right? It's when you say, hey, what do I want for dinner tonight? What do I want for lunch today? It's the primary ingredient that you are shelling out money to eat, right? So we're gonna actually to fill out this F-STEP worksheet, we're gonna do a play on a Americanized shrimp scampi. So in Europe, scampi, it refers to a langostino-like creature that was normally prepared with garlic and white wine and butter, right? One of the classic preparations. So then when Italian immigrants and European immigrants came stateside, we didn't have langostinos widely available, so they did shrimp scampi, or shrimp in the scampi fashion, which has evolved to a classic dish on American Italian menus that you see all over the country that most people are familiar with, even if they didn't grow up in the United States. So in shrimp scampi, when I think of shrimp scampi, like most of you, I think of a couple of key flavors besides the shrimp, and that is going to be garlic, of course, right? You can't have shrimp scampi without garlic, white wine, and also some lemon juice for the acidity, and then, of course, you have to have butter, right? But also, too, when I'm looking at these three ingredients, the white wine, the garlic, the butter, it really is more part of the sauce component than it is the dish. Of course, you could have these ingredients sauteed into your dish as well to reinforce those flavors, but really these flavor components are what make up our sauce. So we're gonna add a couple more ingredients. We're gonna come back to that later in our sauce section. So with my shrimp scampi, it's a given that we're gonna use garlic and white wine and butter and create a sauce with it. That's what makes it a shrimp scampi in the first place. So I'm gonna add a starch, usually, and in this case, you could add anything from pasta, bread, rice, polenta, pasta being the most universal and widely accepted starch that goes on a shrimp scampi. But in this case, let's switch it up a little bit, because it's my dish, it's gonna be my planned shrimp scampi. Maybe instead of doing a big pasta entree, I wanna serve it as an appetizer. So I'm gonna do bread, specifically a piece of baguette, right? And that's gonna possibly be my serving utility player, right? You need some sort, because the sauce is so important to the dish. If you don't have any starch, you're kind of missing out on that sauce. You need something to scoop the sauce up with that'll help soak up the sauce, especially when you really nail that beautiful garlic, white wine, and butter emulsion, okay? So we'll have some baguette there to help soak up the sauce. We'll have some tomatoes there, which is pretty common. And then also I'm thinking along with that, of course, you're gonna want some fresh herbs. Okay, so baguette, fresh herbs, tomatoes, all good in the hood. Now, we have the overall structure of our dish, okay? When you're choosing, so let's just say that you've never had shrimp scampi before, and maybe you're not even making a shrimp scampi, you want to make some shrimp. Every single ingredient that you choose, your secondary and your tertiary ingredients, should be there for one purpose and one purpose only, because it enhances the flavor of the primary, the shrimp. If you order a shrimp dish and every single item on that dish detracts from the shrimp, right? Well, then I've failed as a chef, okay? Because you ordered that dish because you want shrimp, okay? I know it seems very basic, but you'd be surprised at how many people let their egos run away with them, and they just throw all these different things on a plate without fully just stopping and saying, hey, does this extra sauce, does this garnish, does this ingredient serve a purpose outside of, I think it looks cool on the plate? Does it actually enhance my primary ingredient? All right? So once you have your flavor section filled out with your primary ingredient and your secondary and tertiary ingredients, now it's time to talk about your sauce. Now, not every dish needs a sauce, but if you're not gonna put a sauce on your dish, it should be a conscious decision, right? You say, oh, my dish doesn't need a sauce, right? You shouldn't have no sauce on a dish because you forgot about it or you didn't think about it, right? Almost every dish can be enhanced with some sort of flavorful moisture, which is basically what a sauce is. Okay, even a little bit of olive oil drizzled over the top. So if you, and not all dishes again need it, but it needs to be a conscious decision. No, I'm good. I don't need this. I don't need sauce. Okay, so in this case, normally your sauce, your primary flavor of your sauce is going to be a base. So the first thing you want to do is pick what technique you're going to be using, because these techniques, as you learn in the mother sauce section, the 3 modern mother sauces are all technique based, okay? And even then, emulsion, reduction, puree, sometimes they'll cross paths a little bit. So in this case, we're going to reduce our white wine. So technically it starts off as an emulsion, as a reduction, but then we're going to mount with butter at the end. So we want to make sure we're following best practices for emulsifying a sauce, which we go through in our various emulsification technique videos, like our beurre blanc and making mayo and things like that. Okay, so once you identify the technique you'll be using, then you follow the best practice of that technique, and the flavor structure is just subjective, right? The flavors are what you want your sauce to taste like. The technique is how you get the sauce to actually, be servable on a plate, okay? You don't want a broken beurre blanc, right? You don't want a greasy, fuzzy, poorly reduced veal demi-glace, right? But you follow the appropriate techniques for your various sauces, which is only 3. There's only emulsion, reduction, puree, and you put your flavor structure on top. As long as your flavor structure is nice and balanced, you're going to be able to make any sauce that you could ever imagine. But again, we're creating a dish or we're dissecting a dish, so we need to stop and ask ourselves, what is the mother sauce that the Scampi sauce fits underneath, the modern mother sauce, right? And in this case, it's going to primarily be an emulsion, but we're also going to reduce because we're cooking with some white wine. We want to concentrate the flavors. So if your primary sauce flavor, so SF stands for sauce flavor, that's your primary flavor of your sauce, it's usually going to be your sauce base. Okay, so chicken stock, veal stock in the case of a veal demi-glace, and here we're using just a white wine. Again, just like when you're constructing your original flavor structure for your primary flavor, which was your shrimp, the secondary and tertiary ingredients that you pick for your sauce base need to, number 1, enhance the actual sauce base, your primary flavor of your sauce, and then that cohesive flavor of your finished sauce needs to enhance your primary ingredient, which is your shrimp. So now that I understand, well, I'm making an emulsified white wine sauce with garlic and butter, I can use my sauce naming formula. Now, the sauce naming formula is kind of silly. It's just there for fun. But a lot of people ask questions about it because the formula is hard to read. But I developed the sauce naming formula and the dish naming formula because one of the most common questions I got, which I was surprised at when I was doing in-person boot camps, is, Chef, how do you name your dishes? Like, how do you make your menu sort of flow? And there's different styles, right? There's different ways that people, and methods that people use to name a dish. And you'll see it when you read through a chef's menu. They usually have a stylistic personality of how the menu reads and the cadence, and it's all kind of there to help you perceive the dish in a certain way. So this isn't the only method, and this isn't even the only method that I use. This is just a good jumping off point if you feel completely lost. So the sauce naming formula is basically your secondary flavor plus your tertiary flavor plus your primary flavor plus your sauce technique. And I know that sounds like a mouthful, but you already know your sauce technique and your primary flavor and your tertiary flavor, your secondary flavor. So a sauce like this would look something like a garlic, butter, white wine emulsification. Okay, so that could be your starting point for this sauce name. Is you say, okay, hey, I'm doing sauteed shrimp with a garlic, butter, white wine emulsion. Now, to kind of make it a little bit tighter, possibly a little sexier, let's say we cross out the butter and the white wine, because emulsion is kind of assumed that there's fat in there, so they're probably going to guess there's butter or some form of fat, okay? And emulsion is just nice and sort of buttery word in general. And then we're just going to change that to a garlic Chablis emulsion. Chablis is a dry Chardonnay that comes out of France. It's very commonly used in cooking because it's dry and it's subtle. Okay, so now instead of a mouthful like we had previously, we just call it a garlic Chablis emulsion. However, a white wine and a butter emulsion also has a classical technical name, which is a beurre blanc. So we could also just call it a garlic Chablis beurre blanc. So that's just a couple different naming conventions that you can use for your sauce. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, and you're going to develop your own style over time. That formula is there just to help you kind of have a jumping off point. So once you understand your primary flavor and all the flavors that go with it, plus your sauce, and you understand the technique you're going to use to make your sauce and the flavor structure in your sauce, now it's time to go over to your cooking technique section and identify the actual cooking techniques you'll be using. Now, the cooking technique will be chosen for you in large part by the ingredient that you pick, the primary ingredient or whatever ingredient you're applying that cooking technique to, plus your imagined desired flavor structure. So in the technique cooking section of the F-STEP curriculum, we talk about breaking the techniques, all of the cooking techniques, into two major categories. Your fast category and your slow category. Slow cooking for the most part is reserved for tough cuts of meat that have collagen and connective tissue that need to be broken down over long periods of cooking to become tender. And your high, hot, fast cooking techniques are reserved for tender cuts that dry out easily and that don't need a whole lot of cooking. So shrimp would fall into this category. So in the fast category, any one of these actual cooking techniques would work great for the shrimp, but also each technique is going to have an effect on the overall flavor. Your roasted shrimp is going to taste different than your grilled shrimp, it's going to taste different than your broiled shrimp, it's going to taste different than your sauteed shrimp. So once you get into the right category, right, the right macro category for your protein or even your vegetable, fast versus slow, then you pick your actual technique, which is going to have the same overall effect on the appropriate cooked texture and finished product of the protein. However, it's going to impart a certain flavor. Okay. So in this case, because we're doing a play on a shrimp scampi, we are going to saute the shrimp, and so we're just going to go ahead and write the ingredient next to the technique that we're using, because a lot of the times when you are creating a more complex dish, you'll have multiple ingredients receiving multiple cooking techniques. Speaking of which, those tomatoes that we identified earlier as something we're going to add into this overall flavor structure to make the dish more interesting. We can take those tomatoes, we can seed them, we can dice them, we can concasse, which means we blanch and pull off the skin and then seed and then we dice. And we just sprinkle the concassed or the diced tomatoes over the top of the finished shrimp scampi, and it's going to bring a nice bright tomatoey flavor to the dish, right? Nothing wrong with that. However, if we want to get more creative, we can apply a different preparation technique. We can confit the tomatoes, we can roast the tomatoes, we can smoke the tomatoes, we can do all the above, right? And when you do all the above, when you apply multiple cooking techniques to the same ingredient and put them on the same plate, we call that a flavor spectrum. So just like there's different shades of blue and there's different shades of green and shades of gray, right? There are shades of flavor that could develop a spectrum. So you take a tomato, the possible flavors you can get out of that tomato are a spectrum. And then when you grill it, you have a grilled flavor. When you roast it, you have a roast flavor. When you have a smoked flavor, you have a smoked flavor. But if you combine a couple different preparations on the same plate and you do it well, right, then you can offer a broader flavor spectrum of that tomato, which is going to make the dish more interesting because it'll get various flavors out of that same single ingredient. However, it's a little bit more of an advanced approach, right? The more flavors and the more preparation that you have on the plate, the more busy the plate can be, and the less cohesive it can appear. And sometimes you'll just end up where certain flavors are just straight up battling each other. And that's going to do what? It's going to detract from your primary ingredient, which is your shrimp, which you never want to forget, right? So if it detracts and takes away the star power of your shrimp, then you don't want to do it. Anyways, I wanted to mention that here because, again, it's something I want you to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through and developing your own dishes. It really is a fun, interesting approach that can make your dish seem really creative. Now that we've figured out what our primary flavor is and the secondary and tertiary flavors that are going to create that overall dish, plus the sauce technique and the cooking technique, we now have enough information to do a first draft name of our dish if we want to name it. So again, this naming formula is just more for fun than anything, and to answer the question of, chef, how do you actually name your dishes? Some people like to write menus when they're hosting dinner parties, or maybe you're a sous chef who's coming up in the world and you're starting to write menus for the first time and you want sort of a jumping off point. So a good jumping off point is your primary flavor and your primary technique, plus your secondary technique and your secondary flavor, any tertiary flavors, and then a sauce name. So in this example, even though it kind of sounds like a mouthful, right, you have all the information on your sheet that you just filled out. So we can easily call this dish a sauteed shrimp. So sauteed shrimp with bruschetta baguette, confit tomato, roasted garlic, chablis beurre blanc. So the bruschetta baguette is it's a nice little alliteration, right? I like alliteration in my menu description. And since I wanted the baguette on there, because we're doing maybe a appetizer style, and I wanted the flavor of tomato, I wasn't planning it at first, but I thought, hey, baguette, tomato, why not do a take on a bruschetta? You have, garlic in bruschetta, and also too, you have bruschetta, which is your baguette that you slice and you toast, or your piece of bread that you toast or grill, and then you rub with garlic and you drizzle with some olive oil. That's your bruschetta. And then you have the Americanized version, bruschetta, which is basically an Italian flavored salsa, for lack of a better term. So you got your usually a diced tomato and a basil and an olive oil and garlic on top of your bread, which is your delivery device for that salsa, again, for lack of a better term. So now we're taking a play on a bruschetta, we're incorporating it into our classic shrimp scampi, and then maybe if we play around with the tomato flavors like we talked about before, we have this dish which, at its base level, people all relate to, and then you do some fun riffs on top and people walk away and say, hey, that was just kind of a fun play on shrimp scampi, that was cool, I like that, okay? Another thing that you can do is, so like on a menu, sometimes the primary ingredient or the primary name of the dish, I'll put in bold, and then I'll put like a little bar next to it. So you could do shrimp scampi, right? Hand-rolled herb pasta, sun-dried tomatoes, chive batons, chablis, beurre blanc, and yeah, I left the C off on the beurre blanc because my proofreading isn't that great sometimes. Or you can do a sauteed shrimp, bruschetta baguette, confit tomato, roasted garlic, and chablis beurre blanc. I think that's gonna be our working name for now. Okay, so now that you have your name and your primary ingredients, all that sort of stuff, you're just about ready to go into the kitchen and start cooking. But if you're like most people, whether you're a hobbyist chef or a professional chef, a lot of times you forget the most important part, which is execution, right? Because they don't talk about it in cookbooks. They hardly even talk about it in professional kitchens until they're in the weeds and trying to figure out why. Okay, so what you want to do at this stage is you want to imagine yourself in your environment cooking this dish. Can it be executed? Now, number one, what style of service are you doing? Are you doing all minute, which means you're cooking everything last minute, right? A fast-paced, like hotline style of service where everything just from start to finish, you cook, and you put in a pan or on a plate and you serve? Or are you doing buffet? Does your product need to be able to be held warm for an hour, hour and a half as you have 100 people go through your buffet line? Or if you're cooking, say, a Thanksgiving dinner and you want to do a play on a shrimp scampi or whatever dish that is, and you're going to have people eat over the course of 45 minutes, can you make sure that it's served at the appropriate temperature, at the appropriate time? Do you have enough space in your oven to execute all these dishes that you have planned for Thanksgiving? How does this work into your already pre-existing workflow on the hotline? These are all things that you need to be thinking of before you actually step into the kitchen and start cooking it, especially in a professional environment, because you're on the line on a Friday night, you got a couple new dishes on the menu, all of a sudden these new dishes, you didn't think through the workflow and how they're going to force some cooks to cross over, how it's just you don't have enough room on your station for all the mise en place that you need, right? And now you're going down in flames, now you're in the weeds, all because you didn't think through your execution when you were creating your dish in the first place, right? And it doesn't matter, you could have the best flavor, right? You could have the highest end beef, you go out and import, some beautiful blue spot prawns for your play on a shrimp scampi. You could actually, import the real langostinos and get that beautiful, sweet, briny, succulent meat. You could use a really nice high-end white wine. You can cook it on the beautiful stove in an all-clad pan. You can have all the best stuff, all the best ingredients and equipment and all the best intentions, but if you can't figure out a way to get that on a plate and to your guest while you're cooking 30 other menu items on a Saturday night and still maintain the quality of your original test recipe, then nothing else really matters, right? So that's why it's important to stop and think execution. I have my dish, I know what I'm doing, how am I going to execute it? And we go over this in detail in our E is for Execution section of the F-STEP curriculum. So this portion of the F-STEP worksheet forces you to stop and say, can I execute this? Do I have the appropriate tools? Do I have the appropriate time? Do I have the appropriate, ability level to do it, okay? So in this case, shrimp scampi, fast-paced dish. We're going to saute it on the hot line or on the stove. So it's going to be all minute execution. So in this little section here, I normally would just bullet point out, like from start to finish. You know, an order comes in for my shrimp scampi. What is my start to finish methodology to get my ingredients that I prepped during the prep phase of my day, which I could have prepped, you know, yesterday for all I care, right? So now I have my prep, I'm on my line, I'm waiting for my order. The order comes in, I'm thinking in my head, what's my workflow going to look like? Well, first of all, I'm going to toast the baguette and rub it with some garlic, right, for some flavor. But also, too, I don't want to go through the entire process of sauteing my shrimp and at the end think, oh, damn, I forgot the baguette and now I can't build my bruschetta, right? So after I toast my baguette, I can build my bruschetta, right? I'll take my confit tomatoes and that mixture that I made and put it on top of my baguette that I'm kind of envisioning being sliced on a long bias, and I'll build it off to the side on like a sizzle pan or a sheet tray, so that way if it gets a little bit messy, I can pick it up and transfer it to the plate and have a nice clean presentation starting point. And at that point, I'll probably fire the shrimp. And I'm kind of envisioning in my head, you know, from start to finish when I'm sauteing the shrimp, and I'll make the sauce in the pan. Pretty classic approach. When I plate, I'm going to plate the shrimp either around the bruschetta baguette or possibly even over the top. If I plate it over the top, then the tomatoes might fall and ruin the presentation. So maybe I'll just put on a rectangle and lean it up, right? So just by forcing myself to think like, how's my plate going to look? Right, I got my bruschetta baguette there. What happens if I put the shrimp on top? What happens if the plate is round? How does that affect the look and the feel of the dish versus a rectangle, right? You want to envision all this stuff now so that way you have a better prepared plan of attack when you actually walk into the kitchen and start cooking. Because again, this is all mental framework right now. You're creating this dish in your head and you're game planning it out. You've yet to actually walk in the kitchen and start cooking. After plating, we're going to garnish it. So maybe we'll just garnish with some fresh herbs, some tomato concasse, little drizzle of some garlic oil. Who knows, right? You can garnish your heart's desire as long as the garnish adds interest to the plate, the garnish is edible, and the garnish supports the primary flavor, which is your shrimp. So your garnish should always make your dish look better. If the garnish, your garnish should always make your dish taste better. If all it does is look cool, but when you actually put it in your mouth, it doesn't deliver, then it's a trash garnish, okay? All right, so now we've completed pretty much all the process. We know what our flavor structure is gonna be, okay? We know what our sauce is going to be. We know what cooking techniques we're gonna use, and we know our plan of attack for the execution. Now at this point, there's still one more step that we need to do before we even walk into the kitchen, and that is write the almighty prep list, okay? So over here is a prep list generator. Most professional cooks at the end of the night, they know their dishes pretty well, so they're gonna just take a piece of, receipt tape and write a prep list on, or they'll have a notebook that they write it in. Some kitchens have like, prep lists where you just basically, it's all typed out for you and you just mark, the quantities that you need to prep. Everyone has their own methods. But if you're new to prep, if you're new to planning ahead and prepping ahead, this prep list generator on the side, so again, the end of the F-STEP process is P is for preparation, right? This prep list generator takes a newer cook and sort of forces them to go through a series of gut checks and to have a game plan so they can be fully prepared when they walk into the kitchen and actually start cooking their dish. So first step is, what is your sauce base? It's white wine. Cool. All we need to do is go to the store and buy a bottle of white wine. You would be amazed at how many students and how many professional cooks think to themselves, or even say to me, hey, I'm going to do a pan roasted filet with a veal demi-glace, and they walk into the kitchen and they start chopping up all of their vegetables and getting their mashed potatoes going, but they don't even have a veal demi made. So they can't even do anything. They can't even complete the dish until the veal demi is made, which takes 12 hours, and then ripped down into a demi-glace. So the veal stock takes 12 hours to make, then you got to rip it down to a demi-glace, right? So you're looking at probably 18 to 24 hours away from even being able to put your dish on a plate, right? So what's your sauce base? Do you need a stock? Do you have stock in-house? Is it 3 p.m. on a Saturday and now you're trying to run a special and you thought you had veal stock but you don't? Well, now you want to change your sauce base. Now you go all the way back through your F-STEP process and you say, okay, I need another sauce because I don't have my sauce base of the demi-glace, okay? Now, do I need to marinate this? Okay, am I marinating anything? So a lot of proteins are enhanced by marination, okay? So if you make the conscious decision not to marinate your protein, it should be a conscious decision. It shouldn't be because you forgot or because it was an afterthought or because you didn't plan. You thought to yourself, do I need to marinate? And the answer is no, I don't need to marinate my shrimp for shrimp scampi. Do I need to brine it? No, I don't need to brine it for shrimp scampi. If it was a chicken breast, do you need to brine it? Probably, right? And that's what the prep list generator kind of forces you to do. Think of it almost like as a very simple computer code, right? You're going through and you're creating a chicken breast dish, and you go in and you say, okay, I'm going to cook a chicken breast as my primary ingredient, and you get down here and you say, no, I'm not going to marinate it, and I'm not going to brine it. And then I hope at that point you think to yourself, well, brine, I do remember what Chef Jacob said about brining lean cuts of meat in the F-STEP curriculum. Maybe I'll rethink that. Damn, now I can't do the chicken breast for a special tonight because I know a chicken breast takes at least 12 hours to brine, right? So I'm gonna have to do that chicken breast special tomorrow, but maybe tonight I'll do something else, okay? So again, it's a gut check. Do you need to marinate? Do you need to brine? And when you say no to those options, it should be a conscious decision with a purpose behind it, not because you're too lazy or not because you planned enough in advance, okay? Do you need to fabricate? Do you need to break down your beef tenderloin to create a filet mignon? Do you need to break down a whole chicken to create a chicken breast, right? Do you need to peel the shrimp? Okay, these are all things that you usually need to put at the beginning of your prep because until you fabricate your main ingredient, you can't actually get your dish complete. Okay, so again, just another gut check. Things that are intuitive to professional cooks or even hobbyist cooks that have been cooking in the home kitchen for a long time, but if you're brand new to this whole process, this prep list generator gives you a series of gut checks when you're actually creating your prep list, right? Sides, are you going to be cooking a root vegetable or serving a root vegetable on the side? No, you're not, so you don't need that on your prep list. If you're serving beets or parsnips, know that it's gonna take an hour and a half to 3 hours to roast or to braise or to do whatever, and that slow cooking technique to take that rock hard beet or that rock hard parsnip and turn it into something that's edible, okay? So, knowing that if you did have a root vegetable component in this dish, what's one of the first things you want to get going when you walk into the kitchen? You want your root vegetable prep at the very top of your list, okay? Green veg, you have a green veg on this dish? Nope, we don't have a green veg, but if you do you need to blanch it first, right? So you want to blanch, you want to chill, you want to have that all set aside. Okay, and then starch. What is your starch? And there's a quick little note here that basically says, be careful pairing a starch with a protein. It can get heavy. So a lot of times an entree will be a protein, a starch, and a veg, all right? If you pair a heavy starch with a prime protein, then the perception of that dish is going to be heavier, okay? So when I'm at home on a Sunday and I eat a spaghetti and meatballs, I'm planning on having it kind of like settle in my gut and make me tired for a while, right? And that's part of the, I'm gonna go straight from the dinner table to my lazy boy and take a little bit of a snooze, all right? That's part of the plan. Now, if I'm taking somebody out on a date to a high-end restaurant, we order a couple of different dishes, and we have a plan to go to a show or on, dancing afterwards or whatever it is, and now after we finish our entrees, we're just like, oh, we just feel horrible because it's really heavy, then that's going to leave a lasting impression on us and our experience at that restaurant. You get a nice big, piece of, steak or whatever, and also too, maybe you shouldn't be ordering steak and potatoes if you don't want to feel heavy afterwards, but just think, what is the situation in which you're serving? Are you doing a dinner party in which it'd be inappropriate for people to be, have a heavy gut afterwards? Well, then be careful with, serving a lot of heavy starches with your prime protein because it can detract from the dish. So again, the starch accompaniment and the veg accompaniment should be a conscious decision, not just an afterthought, all right? Now, at this point, we can start writing our prep list, okay? So any additional items that you want to bring into the kitchen as part of your mise en place, right, is, so we're going to mince some herbs, we're going to confit some tomatoes, we're going to, roast some garlic, and other various mise en place like some white wine, olive oil, have some lemons for some lemon juice, things of that nature. So now you have this F-STEP worksheet completely filled out, okay? You have a good plan of attack, and most importantly, it's a roadmap for you to go and travel down in the kitchen as you're creating a new dish, you're trying to recreate a new dish or make a dish your own, okay? Because this is making you, number one, consciously think about each step you're doing in the kitchen so you have a game plan, but also, two, it's helping you to kind of track each decision. So maybe you do your play on a shrimp scampi and you think, hey, this would have been really a super cool dish if I had grilled the shrimp instead. Or maybe the tomato got a little bit too wacky with smoking it and confit it and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just going to, backtrack, go back to basics and just do a simple diced tomato. Okay, so those are all the things that you want to take into consideration, and that's how you use the F-STEP worksheet. So again, if you're new to the system, if you're new to creating your own dishes, taking the information that you learned in the F-STEP curriculum and the F-STEP process, and then applying it to the F-STEP worksheet is going to really help to develop that mindset of building flavors, choosing a sauce, creating any sauce you want by applying the appropriate technique to that sauce, which is 3, reduction, puree, or emulsification, choosing the appropriate cooking technique, thinking and planning about your execution, and then getting a good prep list going so that you can set your mise en place. So that way, when it's time to actually throw down in the kitchen, you are ready to rock. Because what you don't want to do is start sauteing your shrimp and be like, the garlic, I forgot the minced garlic. And then like, oh no, the butter, I got the butter over here. And then ideally, especially in a professional environment, or if you just want to cook like a professional, once you're set, okay, you have your mise en place set, all right? Normally you have a hotline in one side and a counter on the other side, okay? You want to be spinning 180s until you're done, okay? So you throw your shrimp in, blah, 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 you're cooking your shrimp, you're sauteing it, right? You're dropping in your white wine, deglazing, creating your sauce, spinning around, putting on a plate, garnishing, grabbing that plate, putting it in the window. The entire time, you're being super efficient because you have all of the things you need, your mise en place set and your game plan. You've already visualized your execution. So again, that's the purpose of the F-STEP worksheet. Use it, don't use it, but you might find it helpful. And if you do choose to use it, that's how I recommend you use it.